Hey everyone, welcome to another Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord Q&A. We've got John Vervaeke back for his bi-weekly Q&A with us. And yeah, thanks John for being here.
Thanks, Brett. Again, sorry for not making it here last time, but Akira the Don could only meet on that Monday, and so I wanted to be there for the release of the Meaning Wave. So I hope everybody was okay with me not being here last couple weeks ago.
Oh, not a problem, and I watched that, and that was great, and I think a lot of people over here went over and saw it as well. So that was a great event, and I hadn't heard of him before, so I was glad to get to know Akira.
Yeah, I really like the song too. I think it's really. I just really enjoy listening to it.
So we've got a lot of questions queued up, so let's get straight to them. Let's start off with Kira.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
I can hear you, Kira.
Awesome. Okay, so the question I have is, John, you've talked about the use of psychedelics in an appropriate context within the confines of within the structure of a wisdom tradition.
Yeah.
Now that we've kind of been going through quite a bit with the ecology of practices, where would you say that psychedelics fits in with that ecology of practices, and what else would you recommend having in place for that?
Yeah, I mean that's a very good question, and I'm hesitant to answer you. I will answer you. I'm not going to cop out. My hesitancy is it's a question that I think ultimately needs quite a bit of empirical research to give sort of a definitive, confident answer to. So please take it under advisement that what I'm offering to you is sort of mostly speculative in the somewhat pejorative sense of the word speculative. So, I mean, I think that people should have a significant experience, and I don't know what that means in terms of years, but years, I would think, in which they have developed quite a few of the practices that are directed specifically towards addressing self-deception. So active open-mindedness, for example, aspects of mindfulness practice, and also practices that are designed to link between propositional and perspectival knowing, such as chanting, Lectio Divina, because that's the important bridge that's going to be needed in order to make sense of the psychedelic experience. And then I would also hope that I would recommend a stronger term. I would recommend that within that period of, let's say, 2 to 3 years, they have also become, and I think this is the right verb, owned within a community of co-minded and co-dedicated people. By co-minded, I don't mean that everybody shares the same metaphysical doctrines per se, but that people, like we see in the Sangha or here in the Discord server, are meeting in good faith and are edifying and supporting and affording each other's cultivation of wisdom. So I would then see use of psychedelics happening not by sort of isolated individuals, but within particularly sacred ritualistic context. So perhaps it might be something that is something like an initiation ceremony that moves people perhaps from a novice stage to an aspirant stage or something like that. I think it should have the same kind of setting as things like baptism had. I don't think it should be initially something that people just sort of do regularly. Perhaps after that, it can be something that is used by, as long as it seems to go well with that person, then perhaps it could be something that can be used a little bit more frequently, perhaps like the Eucharist was in Christianity. So I think because it is a very powerful tool, it has to be set within a context that both is cautious about its power, but also reverential about its potential for supporting transformation in people.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you.
Great. Adam, you've got a question.
Yeah, hey John. I had a philosophical question for you.
Please.
What are the main tenets of Vervaekeanism?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't know there was such a thing. The main tenets of Vervaekeanism. Um, ah, I don't know. I guess the main tenets of well, I mean, let's try in terms of sort of traditional philosophical categories. Since you posed it as a philosophical question, I suppose the main metaphysical tenets would be that your metaphysics should try and get beyond both a Kantian and a Platonic framework by centering on intelligibility as the main thing that unites your phenomenology and your epistemology to your metaphysics. I think that that your epistemology should be very oriented towards phenomenology and pragmatism. I think it should then overlap with, I think something like a cognitive science to give us the deep interconnection between our epistemology and our particular our scientific practice that is relevant to both epistemology and intelligibility. And then all of that machinery, what used to be called ethics, but I don't mean ethics in the modern sense. I mean it very much the way Pierre Hadot talks about it, where we're talking about the whole project of ascesis, the whole project of spiritual exercises and the transformation of individuals who are seeking wisdom, the core project, above and beyond other aspects of what your philosophy should be doing and helping you make moral decisions. It should be centered on the sets of practices that are most in concert with your metaphysics of intelligibility, your pragmatic and phenomenological epistemology, and your cognitive science for the optimal transformation of individuals and collections of it, communities of individuals, not collections, that was a mistake, communities of individuals towards the cultivation of wisdom, and perhaps ultimately something like an integration between wisdom and a systematic and comprehensive systemic transformation of individuals that we might call enlightenment. Did that answer your question?
It did, although, can I ask a follow-up?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, you rang true on intelligibility a few times, and you distinguished it from other philosophies, so could you play a little more on intelligibility?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is where, for me, I mean, intelligibility is, I think, a nexus point. You were thinking of it like in a small world network of people's cultural cognitive grammar. Intelligibility, I think, is like the central hub because it links aspects of your phenomenological experience, aspects of your conceptualization of the world, and aspects of your theorizing about the world together. They all presuppose intelligibility, and you can see that there's ways in which you're into a couple major choice points around this. One is you can go sort of the modern route in Kant and argue, following Occam, that intelligibility is purely a mental property. It is something imposed by the mind on the world. Or you can go the Platonic view and say that, in a sense, intelligibility is completely where we want to put it, that intelligibility is something that is completely I don't want to attribute the wrong adjective here to Plato. So that intelligibility is, in some sense, I don't have a better, but something that's sort of a purely abstractly existing metaphysical entity. And I think what the traditions around pragmatism and phenomenology have brought out is that intelligibility is some property of things, real patterns of things, that makes the cognitive act of understanding them possible for us. And that although in theoretical analysis we can separate the cognitive act of sense making from whatever those real patterns are, in our experience they are, because they mutually, in our experience they're interdependent and interdefining for us. And so that's what the term intelligibility means. It means for me the point the point of, if you'll allow me, because I talk about this a lot in the series, the deepest point of conformity between the sense-making capacity of the mind and the real patterns that are found in the world.
That's great. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, Andre has a question that he wants me to read. Can phenomenology and cognitive science be implemented correctly and fluently together? Can Heidegger's phenomenology, especially ideas like equipment and being ready at hand, be applied to further to those?
To cognitive science? Is that what the implication of the last part of the question is?
Andre, you're here. Did you want to clarify?
Yeah, well, you covered a lot of it in what you were just saying to Adam there. Yeah, so I was at a talk earlier today, and it talked about some of your ideas. I'm not sure what lecture it's from because I haven't watched them all. I've only watched one. But it was like an oscillation between contemplation and meditation, and it was called something ontology. And there was an idea of using detachment of equipment. And when I saw the word equipment and ontology, I was thinking in terms of Heidegger and things being ready at hand or present at hand. And I'm wondering whether that can work.
So there's a I don't want to be presumptuous, sorry, pretentious. My work is actually built on the work of what's called 4E cognitive science, especially the work of people like Bert Dreyfus, Gallagher, people like that. And these, Dreyfus in particular, brought Heidegger into cognitive science in a profound way. I agree with Dreyfus, not everybody does, but I think a very good case can be made that a lot of Heidegger's notions, especially around Dasein and the presencing of being and other things in that constellation of ideas, I'm not equating them, but they do form a constellation, that a lot of what Heidegger's talking about can be understood in terms of relevance realization. Dreyfus argues this specifically, and it was precisely because he brought this Heideggerian notion into cognitive science that he was able to challenge standard computational models of mind and introduce what has later been called the frame problem, which is exactly the problem of how do we zero in on relevant information from all the available information. I think that's very much one of the ways in which Heidegger's intersection with cognitive science has had a huge influence on my thinking. The work of Gallagher and others, especially the people who are talking about cognition as inherently embodied and enacted and embedded, this, of course, is deeply influenced by Heidegger, and even more so by Merleau-Ponty and the phenomenology of perception. So the connections there are deep, they're influential, they are very active right now, and I think they're even foundational for what I think is going to be the dominant model. It's already one of the most important. I think it will become the dominant model of how you do cognitive science, which is called 4E cognitive science, third generation cognitive science. So that's why Heideggerian themes recur throughout the series. I have an episode dedicated to Heidegger within the series.
Okay, thank you very much. That cleared up a lot for me. And yeah, thanks for fielding my question.
Thank you. I think it's a good question.
And the last few questions have brought to mind the role that these philosophers would play in a religion that's not a religion. In there are a lot of people who, who have read these philosophers, but a lot of people who haven't. Where do you see sort of philosophical reading of these deep thinkers as sort of required reading, and would that limit its appeal to the general public who may not be interested in reading these philosophers in depth or have that capacity?
So no, I don't see it as I don't see it. I don't think people have to have read Dionysius to be good Eastern Orthodox Christians or Aquinas to be good Catholics. But I would also say that studying Dionysius, Maximus, or studying Augustine or Aquinas will help to make you a Catholic. So I think they shouldn't be mandatory, but they should be held up as reverential exemplars. I was hoping to model, to exemplify, perhaps is a better word. There should be individuals who. Right, this is going to sound. I'm not trying to set myself up, but I was trying to exemplify that there should be people within a religion that's not a religion who did what I tried to do with Awakening from the Meaning Crisis and the other series, which is act. Right? And that's kind of how I see Paul Vanderklay and other people acting. It's the role, and this is dangerous because we don't want to set up a priesthood or anything like that. But there are people whose role it is to provide good mediation between the profundities of a community and the day-to-day life of people within that community. So I don't think I don't think it's a mandatory requirement. And this is how it would perhaps differ from other communities of the past. So I'm not trying to set up something like Plato's Academy. That's not what I think is needed. I'm hoping to participate in what is already happening, which is, and I spoke on Wednesday, I spoke at the Movement Summit to all of these, oh my gosh, I was overwhelmed by the number of people who were there from all of these communities of practices around movement and embodiment and mindfulness. And they hadn't read all this philosophy, but I gave a talk about how cognitive science and this philosophical framework can really help them to articulate and access and enhance this practice and build a community. And it was the reception I got at that talk was overwhelming. So these people didn't feel like, they need to go out and read all this stuff. But if it's done well, and it seemed to have been done well by the response I got, and what we can do is I see that there should be some people. This sounds so self-promotional, but it's the role I see myself in. It's perhaps, and I would hope there would be other people would have that role of doing that translation and making it viable and inspirational and edifying to people who are trying bottom up to build the religion that is not a religion.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. So, Barney, you have a question, and sorry, you got skipped over last week, so thank you for being so patient. Or last month.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Brett. Hi, John. My question is, how can I make sense of COVID-19, George Floyd protests, and climate collapse in a meta sense, so that I can put climate collapse back on the cognitive map or the attention map, because I feel it has been sidelined with the immediacy of COVID-19 and George Floyd.
Yeah, so, this is a really difficult. I'm going to hold off on saying too much on this, but because Jonathan Pajot is going to come on Voices with Vervaeke, we're going to talk about this. So I want. Let me talk about it a little bit, and Barney, I have to talk for quite a little bit, self-referentially. I hope that's okay. I've sort of not commented on this very directly, not because you're not making an important point, but I've been very concerned about any bias that I might bear. What do I mean by that? There's aspects of this movement that are difficult for me. I'm going to invoke an important distinction here that Weber makes between the manifest and the latent function. The manifest function, here, let me give you a good example of this. The manifest function is what any social organization or movement or group of people makes as their explicit goal. The latent function is other functions it might be performing that are not acknowledged but are nevertheless are causally important. So a famous example that that Weber, not Marx, that Weber used was bureaucracy. So bureaucracy, of course, has the manifest goal of coordinating behavior and making the movement of information very efficient. It has the latent function of allowing people to displace blame and to discharge blame and avoid individual responsibility. And Kafka's high art, Kafka's literature is based on us recognizing the tragedy that can exist in the conflict between the manifest and the latent functions. So I'm very concerned about a lot of the manifest goals that I'm deeply sympathetic to them. Do I think that the police have been overly militarized since the Patriot Act? Totally. Do I think that there are lots of dirty tricks that are being played against marginalized groups by, voter suppression and media manipulation? Totally. And I think that's important. Those are very important issues. I think it's a little too simplistic to gather them under the term racism, but that is nevertheless an important part of this. However, so while that manifest part of it has pretty much my unqualified support, the latent function is very, very difficult for me, because the latent function feels like the fundamentalist Christianity I grew up in that traumatized me. I have people telling me that I'm guilty of an original sin that I did not personally commit, but that was committed by my ancestors, and that there's nothing I can do about it, and any of my attempts to overcome it are actually going to be undermined by it because it's so pervasive and profound in my psyche, and that the only proper thing I should do is be endlessly contrite and guilty until some external power pronounces me acceptable for reasons that I know not of. And so that is very, very, I've sort of recused myself because that made me sort of angry and upset by the demonstrations, not because of their goals, which I've already said I think are very important and laudable, noble goals, but what you might call the religious aspects of these things have been very difficult for me to step away from. And I think it's important, therefore, to recognize that there might be other people who are being attracted and participating in these movements for that latent function. COVID has been going on, and people have been isolated. They've been going through domicide. They feel impotent. They can't change things. Now what you have are gatherings together that are very ritualistic. You have iconoclasm, the destroying of images. You have lots of stuff that in any other context an anthropologist would say is religious behavior. So I think what's important, therefore, and now I'm going to get back to your question, Barney. I'm sorry that I took so long, but I wanted you to understand why it's very difficult for me to speak on this, because I feel that no matter what I say, my own bias is twisting things. I'm trying very hard, very careful about this. I do think that if that's the case, and the reason I want to talk to Jonathan is he independently has made arguments about the religious aspects of all of the demonstrations, again, independently from the causes that they are directed towards. I think that if we can remind people that there is, that's what we're starting to do on this Discord service. If we can remind people that there is a properly religious response to these extinction threats. I like what Strawn has suggested, that better than existential threats, and I like it. I'm going to start using that. That there is a proper religious response to the extinction threats, like ecological disaster, and I think we can potentially address the latent function that has made the topic of these demonstrations so super salient to people. I think the religion that's not a religion and what we're trying to do here is exactly the right strategy for answering that. And I think if people are honest, maybe they won't be, I don't know about this, we can say that there are other issues that are as morally valuable as important as dealing with racism and the constellation of things around it, but also can have a properly religious response to it. But I think perhaps even a better response to the degree to which we more carefully and comprehensively and in a cognitively, scientifically rigorous manner cultivate the religion that's not a religion. Is that at all helpful, Barney?
Yeah, let me just throw something real quick here. I've been working with faith groups on climate collapse, and then when COVID hit and George Floyd protests hit, they suddenly are besieged by white guilt and besieged by the breakup of the institution financially, and they're asking for orientation. And my orientation is to provide something that they can further develop to also orient themselves towards climate collapse, which is the heart of what I've been working on. So I was hoping, so if another thing I want to throw out is that one plausibility is the failure of meta assimilation and meta accommodation in past practices that needs to be revived. And I don't know whether that is good enough of a good starting point.
I think it is, but I think the point, if people are, so if they're already in a religious framework, maybe remind them, and maybe this goes towards what you're just saying about meta-assimilation and meta-accommodation. Guilt is ultimately a frame-breaking strategy. Therefore, it is necessary for insight and transformation. Guilt alone is insufficient. You also need a frame-making strategy, and that's where love, especially agapic love, is supposed to take the lead. And I mean one of the themes running through, especially prevalent in Christianity, is that ultimately the love should be more important to you than the guilt. The guilt is ultimately supposed to be the frame breaking that affords a new and more profound kind of frame making. And maybe that's what you're talking about when you're talking about the meta assimilation and the meta accommodation. And so I think the degree to which people can see a community that's offering not only just frame breaking strategies, but frame making strategies, and make them scalable and attractive to other people, I think that's a way of being viable. Now, that's not quite what you want. I would say for people who are staying within their faith community, I would remind them that there is this deep tradition, and it's a constant refrain, that both of these have to be held together. Guilt, the concern I have is when guilt and anger, especially when they come together in outrage, they become exclusive. They are merely frame breaking, and they tend to remove people from rational reflection because of the way they trigger very primitive processing in the brain. So we could perhaps remind people and wake them up to there was always sort of a stereoscopic strategy within the religious traditions. It was not always or never was supposed to be just guilt. It was also supposed to be about love, and that love was supposed to give people a comprehensive way of making the new frame that replaced the frame that was broken in the frame breaking. That's a little bit more helpful to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, and I was going to suggest that COVID-19 and George Floyd protests is just hangover from this, from just the lack of meta assimilation and accommodation from the past.
Well, I mean, I think COVID really exacerbated the meaning crisis, and I was saying at the very beginning we were going to see like large-scale tsunamic sort of mental health issues and people really trying to do everything they can to ramp up meaning. I think that's part of what's going on. I also do think that there are legitimate, like I said, I think the manifest issues need to be addressed. I don't comment on those because that's not my role. But where I can comment is what I think is degree to which this overlaps with meaning crisis may actually make it worse in some ways. The thing that I'm seeing now, and it's only anecdotal, but as the high, the demonstrations is starting to wane, people are getting a rebound effect, right? And so meaning crisis is now striking them as even worse than it was before all of this, because like that. Now what do they do? Now what do they do?
Yep, I agree. Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. That was very helpful.
I hope that people treat what I just said charitably. I mean, I'm very torn about this issue for the reasons I've tried to describe, and that's why I was more autobiographical than I normally am, because I want people to understand that I don't have a simple response to this. I'm trying to work this out precisely because I think there's so much and I mean this in a proper sense. It feels Kafkaesque to me, in this tension between the manifest and the latent.
One issue that Struan and I actually have been debating a bit is, how to address these issues between the left, people on the left, and people on the right who don't want to talk to each other. Particularly, I mean, there's those on the left who seem not, a lot of people not willing to discuss. My suggestion was, a Dialogos type approach, and finding those who are willing to talk and sort of demonstrate those, to show that we can have those conversations.
Well, I mean, that's part of Dialogos. I mean, what I've had, and I keep reminding people, is I see Dialogos actually within a whole pedagogical program, but so there'd be practices that led into it. And Edward Warsh has the empathy circling, and what he has explicitly done repeatedly is got people who are hardline Democrats and Republicans go through that practice. And what it does very reliably, according to him, and I think he's being very honest, is it moves people from sort of bad faith adversarial into good faith dialogue, in which both sides get rehumanized. A commitment to the possibility of a shared process starts to come into the fore. So I think it's not just an empty hypothesis. I think we already have some. I get it. It's sort of ethnographic and anecdotal information, but we do have empirical evidence that this is in fact an efficacious possibility. I think it would be good if people on the left and people on the right sort of see that they might have a complementary relationship, opponent processing. Mm-hmm. I think if both sides could acknowledge what they're not what they're very good at saying what they make salient. What they need to do is maybe talk about what they background. I think the right tends to background the fact that human beings are beset by fate, that we are small mortal creatures that can be overwhelmed by circumstances, and that we need to take that into account, and we need to band together to help people when they are overwhelmed by fate. I think the left, and that's why the right often falls into cruelty, because it forgets that, I think the left tends to forget that nevertheless, although human beings are beset by fate and they are mortals, they are responsible for virtue. They're responsible for the cultivation of virtue. And that human beings also need an environment that challenges them and demands that they cultivate virtue in a reliable and systematic way. And that's why I think the left tends to fall into self-righteousness as its besetting vice. What's interesting for me is how the seminal sages like Jesus or the Buddha always criticize these two together. They always criticize cruelty and self-righteousness. I think that's important. I've taken that as a signal lesson about, well, maybe we need to sort of look at this in a much more comprehensive fashion, and that's why I try to avoid being specifically political. I'm happy when people, and I thank Zach Stein for this, when people want to do what he, I think, rightly calls meta-political discourse, which is what we're doing right now. When we try and talk about what are the conditions of possibility that would bring about efficacious discourse and interaction and afford good opponent processing within widespread distributed cognition.
Excellent. That's right on along the lines of my thinking. Struan, you have a question.
Thanks, John. It's good to hear you. I'm looking forward to some of your questions. I've read all your recent emails, so thank you for that.
Oh, well, I'm glad you enjoyed them. Okay, so...
I just want to say something before we begin. Strawn is doing, for those of you who don't know him very much, and he's often working behind the scenes, I get this. He's doing some of the most interesting, I don't know what, I mean this as a compliment, like in the sense of Mozart. He's doing some of the most interesting variations on some of the deepest aspects of my work that I've seen anywhere, and I really want to compliment him on that.
Well, I think you're in for a treat then.
He said ominously. Okay, let's go.
Okay. You gave me a very nice description of intelligibility as the bridge between T information and M information, and I asked you about your physical ontology with respect to the formal cause. I couldn't help but notice that the parallels of that bridge and the bridge in the agent-arena relationship, as well as relevance realization and transjectivity, were the same. With this framing, your construal of intelligibility as the norm of norms is not all that surprising, and I believe that it does a lot to explain your endorsement of Spinoza, specifically his views on the Neoplatonic ascent and the notion that ethics is about right relation to the ultimate principle. However, as much as you like Plotinus's vertical axis in terms of ontological levels, you acknowledge that he has nothing valuable to say about the horizontal temporal axis. My proposal is this. Intelligibility is the norm of the vertical axis, but agape is the norm of the horizontal axis. This would make Sorry?
I'm saying because before interrupting, but I mean, I think this is one of the moves that is sort of central in Christianity, what you're doing right now. But please, I interrupted. Right. I was just making non-linguistic noises of approval.
Okay. Yeah, it just cuts out, so I couldn't quite catch it. Sorry about that. Anyway. This would make intelligibility something like the primary principle, and agape, by contrast, the ultimate principle. And yeah, so that I just want to get you. Are you with me?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Insofar, yes. The primary principle in that you have different ways in which being is coming to being. So the vertical with Plotinus is very much ontological. And non-temporal, but the agape, as you said, is through time, and it's in that sense historically creative. And that's an element that is missing from Spinoza. I see where you're going with this. The issue that I have is people see Hegel as correcting that error, but I think Hegel, he really diminishes the vertical dimension, and the aspect of personal transformation that is still central in Spinoza gets lost in Hegel. It would be to go beyond Spinoza and bring something back, but not go the way that Hegel went with it. Okay. Am I sort of seeing what you're seeing?
Yeah. Can I go further? Because I think this might speak to what you just said. Okay. So I would also stipulate that the bridge of intelligibility extends between the poles of the propositional and the perspectival, while the bridge of agape extends between the poles of the participatory and the procedural. If you grant the notion that the vertical axis is static and the horizontal axis is dynamic, then intelligibility speaks to the ground of being, and agape speaks to the pinnacle of becoming. Or to put it another way, I propose to you that this brings true structure and good function into beautiful organization.
It's really good. I like it. The thing I'm wondering about, though, is... So you said that agape is both the participatory and the procedural, but
it's the bridge between.
And so, how do you get the affect that is part that is central to agape? Because that's affect is a perspectival thing, right? It's about modifying your sample.
I don't know. Can you speak a bit more about affect, and I could maybe translate it?
So, my worry here is we're speaking orthogonally. You may be speaking about this sort of in terms of a metaphysical mapping, and I'm thinking about it in terms of a causal relationship between cognitive processes. So take that into consideration. But but what I'm saying is, so agape is obviously a motivational state, and as I've repeatedly said, love is not an emotion or a feeling; it's an existential mode, but it's affective, right? it motivates you, it arouses you, it directly shapes your salience landscaping, it affords sophrosine, etc. So, and I take those to be properly perspectival experiences. Those are alterations of the way in which consciousness is getting an optimal grip on a situation. That's what affect in general does, right? Is it reshapes your salience landscape and help your optimal gripping.
Yeah, okay, so is it possible that you have a perspectival disposition towards affect, but that the affect is ultimately, it comes from the participatory rather than the perspectival? Is that possible?
It could be. I mean, it could be that the difficulty is, and this isn't just my work, this is Redfield and a bunch of other people, they see the participatory is creating affordances, and then the perspectival selects the ones that are affectively salient or significant. And so affect is basically, like I was proposing to you, is actually a translation between participatory affordance and perspectival salience landscaping.
Yeah, I'll need to think about that, but fortunately there's a recording, so then I'll go over it very, very slowly and Google and whatnot and see what I come up with.
Sure. So, I mean, you might want to take a look at the work of Brunenberg and Retveld, R-I-E-T-V-E-L-D. There's a one from 2014. It has dynamical systems in the title, I believe. It's a lot about optimal gripping and this kind of thing.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll check.
Also, sorry, one more thing. Also, the recent work of Mark Miller. He and I are working together. He's trying to bridge between predictive processing models of cognition and my work, and he also thinks that affect is exactly that kind of bridge. So, that's a couple of recommendations.
Okay, I'll try and check it out. Thanks.
Well, thank you. I found that very thought-provoking. Really tasty. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I enjoy coming up with things like that, so I'm glad you're happy.
Thank you.
All right, we've got a couple of questions that are actually more suggestions for Dialogos partners for you. So, Jay Davis, go ahead.
Mic check, 1, 2.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I can hear you.
Hi. First off, a note of gratitude. Thank you for all the work that you've done so far and continue to do, John. I really appreciate it, and the outcome, at least in this server, is more than exciting. Anyway, moving forward, suggestion. And first, a question to contextualize. Are you aware of Forrest Landry?
Yes, and Jordan Hall has, I think, tried to get Forrest and I into conversation, but for sort of circumstantial reasons, it hasn't happened. And then Jordan's been sort of out of the picture for the last couple of weeks for personal reasons.
Right.
So I do have the direct intent to ask him to renew that project when he and I talk again. We're supposed to talk this Wednesday.
Okay, perfect. So I guess my visceral sense is already attuned to something that's already unfolding. Excellent. So that's very good. Second point is the other day we were in the server having the joy of the presence of Guy Sengstock, and I tried to relay one of your speculations, let's say, in one of your recordings that I am not able to give you the reference exactly, but basically, to paraphrase you, you're wondering about how would a circle respond or react to a problem being dropped into it. I don't know if you remember bringing up that point. So I tried to relay that. I don't know if I was successful. And then I actually suggested that Guy reach out to you so that thread of contemplation could move forward. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to get on track with that, housekeeping, so to speak.
And I have talked. I mean, Guy and I are in constant communication. We're meeting every second Tuesday on Peter Limbert's Stoa, and we're doing dialectic and dialogos, and it incorporates a lot of this. Also in conversation with Taylor Barrett, who facilitated the circling group I'm in, and he's been running experiments where he has circling and then he drops a topic in. he's writing a chapter in contributing to the anthology that Christopher Mastropietro and I are putting together, which is going to be done this August, called Internet of Dialogue. We're getting all of these people together, and we're all writing and talking about all of this, the dialectic, dialogos, all of that.
Excellent, excellent. So in closing, just terminology. I'm just maybe offering a name for something that already has another name, but in considering both practical, experiential, lived experience, and going through your material and other people's material, trying to name the experience of what arises through dialogos or any other intersubjective, interpersonal practice of open, good faith dialogue, generative discourse. The word that came up for me was stereologia, as in analogy to stereoscopy. You know, you're able to see in 3D and depth perception through the overlap of two single eyes. So stereologia, so the notion of knowledge or whatever that arises out of two people meeting and creating that something that I don't know how to describe through dialogue. What do you think about that? Stereology in English, but going back to the Greek roots, stereologia would be a coin for that something. What do you think about that?
I think that's very cool, because we actually talk about the phenomena that emerges as the Greek term logos, or the German term Geist. So logos, of course, is part of the word that you're coining there. So that is actually, I like that. I think that's cool. Talk to Chris about that, because there's a sense in which that's right. You get, in fact, people sometimes even phenomenologically report they feel like they not only have their own perspective, but they have another person's perspective right beside them, almost like stereoscopic vision, when they're doing these practices. That's cool. I like that.
All right, thank you. Great, thank you for the feedback. Just the name. It's not the names; it's the practice that matters.
Yeah, but naming things well. I mean, that's reasons why we have myths of namings in so many cultures. Naming things well also affords enhancing the practice.
Correct. So there's my offer. Run with it. Throw it out. Mix it up. Whatever you feels like is right. So just my offering.
Thank you very much.
All right, David, Kinesis, you've got a suggestion as well.
Yeah, John, I'm wondering if you're aware of a guy named Shinzen Young. It's quite popular in
Yeah, I have met him in person, and we had a conversation, lengthy conversation. It was an interesting experience for me. I think it was an interesting experience for him, in that Shinzen, of course, claims to be enlightened, and I took him at his word. There was no reason to doubt that. But it was interesting because in the conversation, what he was most interested in was actually trying to make use of some of the language from cognitive science that I could bring to bear to actually talk about aspects and dimensions of enlightenment experience. So I found that whole encounter very interesting. I found it actually also encouraging that a person who, again, seems authentically to have claimed at least a Buddhist interpretation, and kind of Buddhist interpretation, enlightenment, was finding so much resonance with a lot of this emerging cognitive science. I found that very encouraging.
Yeah, I would suggest a public dialogue for both communities to listen to. I've learned from him meditation, and I think he would be a good dialogos or dialogue partner with you because of his, not only his wide experience in meditation and other contemplative traditions, but also because of his scientific background as well.
Yeah.
A neuroscience consultant and so forth. So
seems good. Yeah, I think that's a good proposal. I will reach out to him. He's very busy, so but I will reach out to him. That's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Mark, you have a question.
Hello, John.
Hey, Mark. Good to hear from you.
Always good to have you here helping us out. I'm trying to finish up a couple of projects, but the next project on my list to sort of tackle in parallel with a much larger and possibly impossible project is figuring out sort of how to divide up your ecology of practices and figuring out this whole integration issue. I know we've talked about this before. And then it's sort of like, well, how would you divide up the ecology of practices? It strikes me as you could do something like movement versus mental only versus things that are integrated into your daily life, right? Like more on the mindfulness scale. Or you could do something around, say, the 4 types of knowing, which is not my favorite model anymore for reasons that will become apparent eventually. And so I'm just trying to figure out what the sort of I guess the different methods of dividing up the ecology of practices might look like, because I'd like to start to do that so that people can sort of grasp on to and figure out which ones, like if I'm doing these 2, I don't need this one, sort of a thing, maybe, if that's even possible. So I want your thoughts on that, if I could get them.
Yeah, so my thoughts on that are going to be incomplete and unsatisfying. Because there's been proposals, and I've wanted to work with other people on this before, and I'm happy to undertake it. I'm trying to come up with such a schematization. And the couple times I've tried it, the projects have sort of collapsed. They didn't keep going. So what I've been doing now to try and give people guidance, and you know this from the saying, is I've been trying to give sort of people design principles about the relationships of complementarity and layering and linking. But I take your point to be well said that nevertheless people need something more categorical in how they put together an ecology of practices. So I am happy to enter into this discussion with people who are doing it. And it might be that we want to talk, people who are doing it bottom up, then we can put, hopefully I can bring some good cogside to bear upon it. I'd like to, I've had a couple of these discussions with Rafe. I'd like to do it more. I'd like to talk to you, Mark, and what's going on in the Sangha for people. I want to see, especially, I've held off on doing this too much because, as you know, we're about to start Western wisdom tradition, and I wanted to give people a deep sense of that before. I didn't want their taxonomy to be based just on the Eastern traditions, because I think it needs to be genuinely capable of a global kind of pluralism. So what I can tell you is I can't give you, other than, like I said, some of these design principles, and but I would like to get this project going explicitly, and I'd like to be a part of it. I think there's other people that should definitely be included, and like I said, Rafe Kelly comes to mind. Now, Rafe is very committed to his own particular ecology, but that doesn't mean he couldn't be a very valuable source for us. I'd like to talk to some of the other people that are trying to do this as well, and see also what's happening here, the Discord server. I don't think I'm in the position to offer, some sort of authoritative top-down taxonomy. I am interested in your implied critique that the method of categorizing ecology in terms of the 4 ways of knowing is probably not a good method. I tend to agree with you on that. I don't think the 4 ways of knowing should be ignored. I think there's other important aspects. I do, yeah. So the design questions, there's design questions, then there's questions of, how does cognition work questions, and there's questions about, and I mean this in strong sense, of the practicality of this, because we want this to be very flexible and scalable for people. And so and we don't want it to be. We definitely want it to be pluralistic and not homogenous. So, I guess I'm basically saying what my concerns are, what I think should go into it, admitting it's really radically incomplete. But I do want to take this up as an important project, and so people who have the relevant expertise on this, and I gave you are one, I think, and I think Rafe Kelly is definitely some. We need to get this discussion going, and we need to get it going soon, and we need to get it going in depth.
Hey, John, it's Tyler. It's good to see you.
Tyler?
Yeah, this is fascinating. Someone mentioned forest land earlier. I just had a few really good conversations with Tim Aylin recently, and we're going to be...
Yeah, Tim is amazing. I love Tim.
Yeah, really a great conversational partner, and very sensitive and introspective and insightful. So we're going to be doing an event that's working from some of the stuff coming out of Forest Landry with ephemeral groups, I think, in the next 5 or 6 weeks. So I know you and I should be having a conversation soon, and maybe we can discuss how that would end.
Have we settled on a time?
I believe it's the 23rd. Did I respond to that email?
I think so. Let me check. I'm sorry for making everybody wait. I just don't want to miss this opportunity. I think we're on for the 23rd.
Yeah, absolutely. So the 23rd for sure. And yeah, I think if we can discuss some of your insights and some of your work and how that may tie into the ephemeral group study and how it will allow for people or afford people a chance to communicate, to articulate, and to develop some sort of communitas, perhaps.
That'd be great. Let me in. That's great. Very much.
Awesome.
And this may be a good time. There's a lot of people here. Some people who I don't think have been here before, to talk about the lessons in your meditation class are quickly becoming, I think, an essential corollary to your Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series.
What was the intent?
Yeah, maybe you can just talk a little bit about that to introduce it to people who aren't aware.
Oh, so the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis is philosophical, right? In that sense, it's trying to cognitive scientific, and that it's trying to give a historical and scientific theoretical explanation of the meaning crisis, its historical and structural features, and then also propose what kinds of cognitive and existential, individual and practices could potentially address the issues in the meaning crisis. What I did not do in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis was actually afford people the chance to start to train the practices and to start to build an ecology of practices. And this is why the discussion with Mark, all of the discussions here have been very important, but the discussion that I had with Mark just now, I think is the most pressing issue that needs to get under further discussion. But what happens in the Sangha is we meet every weekday morning at 9:30, and I'm teaching people meditative practices, contemplative practices, moving practices, like I said, practices that have complementary relationships, linking practices like Lectio Divina and chanting, or practices that integrate movement and mindfulness, like the Tai Chi walking that I taught today. And so I'm directly teaching people practices that are relevant to awakening from the meaning crisis. I'm trying to exemplify them. I'm trying to afford a community. I think a very good community. Community is wonderful, in which they can cultivate an ecology of these practices and get feedback, encouragement from other people. So yeah, I think you're exactly right, Brett. I think that I don't like the word practical because it's become a word that means it's slightly pejorative. So I often say practicable, which is an ugly sounding word, so it won't get confused. But I think the morning classes, and then also the way they are taken up by members of the Discord server here, are the practicable component that is as important and as necessary as the theoretical component that is presented in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
Exactly, and like you said, so we meet at 9:30 Eastern, and actually a little bit before every day, and even on the days when you don't do your class, to do the movement practice before your class, and then we meditate with you. We also meet again at 5 Eastern, and we go through it again. So we're trying to, do it a few times a day, and for those who miss it, but also to sort of expand, sort of push ourselves to do it for longer and more often. So I welcome everyone to join us and check out the schedule. We're coming up to the end of the hour. We have, I think, 3 questions queued up. Are you okay for a few more, or how are you?
But I want to say one more thing to what you just said, because I mean one of the arguments I return to several times in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis is that you need to reclaim the claim that there are many truths that are only accessible to us in transformation, that there are truths of transformation, and that therefore much of what needs even to be known in order to properly awaken from the meaning crisis not be known without also undertaking the important transformation that is aligned to those things that need to be known. And so I think it's a deeper issue. Secondly, I just wanted to point out one more thing, Brett, and then I'll be happy to take 3 more questions, which is I want to also point people to, and the Discord server knows about this, this is with Vervaeke, because those dialogues and dialogical events are supposed to, in fact, form a mediating role between theory of awakening from the meaning crisis and the community and ecology of practices that are found in the morning Sangha. I just wanted to say those 2 things. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do so.
Thank you. Kelmy, you had a question. Are you there, Kelmy?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you now.
Sorry, I actually sort of forgot I put myself in the queue. Hopefully this wasn't already discussed, but I actually just had a quick question. Do you have any recommendations if I am personally interested in the Tai Chi and Qigong, I think that's how you say it, that you've been teaching? Do you have like a recommendation of what to sort of look for? I know like in these kinds of practices, there's a lot of variety. So I don't know if you have, maybe if there's in these days like an online or a YouTube channel maybe you might recommend or something, just to explore that whole area more without getting sort of lost in maybe some of the more maybe fringy aspect of it.
I mean, I have been looking at them, and there's kind of also legal reasons around this, so I haven't actually recommended a particular channel yet. I might do that. I got to talk to Amar a bit more about that. There are important principles to look for. So be wary of people who are, Tai Chi and Qigong that will allow you to move objects with your mind or push things over without touching them, or all that bullshit. So that's a definite thing. Be wary of the opposite end. People who want to reduce Tai Chi and Qigong to just knowing how to punch and kick. They've removed all the mindfulness. They've removed all the aspiration. They've removed all the philosophia. So those are 2 extremes that you should avoid. It's very good if you find somebody who's teaching Tai Chi and sees it within an ecology of practices. It has been my experience that individuals who learn about it in that way tend to get the good out of Tai Chi, where people who learn it as a sole discipline tend to become most fundamentalist about Tai Chi in a way that I think is ultimately detrimental to the Taoist spirit behind Tai Chi. Try to find somebody whose focus is very clearly on the practice and on you and not on themselves. You'll meet lots of people who are charismatic leader and want to convince you of their specialness by how powerful or whatever they are. Find a teacher that provides some forum. This is very important in a virtual world in which Q&A is a reliable event within the teaching. Those are some quick recommendations to look for.
And speaking of Tai Chi, one of our members, Alexi, is actually who's here right now, is actually going to give us a bit of a beginner Tai Chi class tomorrow at 4:30 before the meditation. So 4:30 Eastern. So everyone come to that. We're trying this out. So thank you, Alexi. Struan, you had another question. Yeah.
Yeah, this one is about the written or design document, because what you said last time about the cognitive science thing opened a can of worms with regards to metaphysics. And so what I wanted to ask is, what does metaphysics mean to a physicalist?
What does metaphysics mean to physicalism, like you said in your email?
Physicalist, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just asking. I couldn't quite hear you.
Yeah.
So it depends. It depends. I'm going to talk about the type of physicalism that I think is defensible, which is non-reductive physicalism. So I take metaphysics to be, the term was given to us by Aristotle. I take it to be some reflection that comes after the physics and is beyond the physics and is supposed to give us the ultimate conditions by which we can make sense of the physics. So I think that metaphysics has always, and this is how I see it, as fundamentally different from the supernatural. And one of the things I want to try to challenge is the assimilation of the metaphysical to the supernatural that we've inherited from our Christian tradition. So I think the metaphysics has always been in a relationship of continuity with physics properly. And so I don't think there's any contradiction with a physicalist having a metaphysics. Insofar as a physicalist thinks that there are aspects of physical reality that are presupposed by physics and therefore cannot be established by physics, that they are therefore the proper venue for rational discussion and reflection and plausibility normativity as the only means of justifying and establishing those presuppositions. For example, I think every physicalist, this is only one example, every physicalist is committed to causation, but there is no physicalist, there's no experiment, so I should say, I used the wrong word, there's no physics experiment that can establish causation, because every experiment by its very nature, its intelligibility structure, presupposes causation. Does that mean that causation is just some arbitrary anomalous notion? I think no. I think what you can then do is do what you do, even within analytic metaphysics, is you try and explicate and justify this notion and explain how and why it can have the role it has within your physics. And I think, therefore, there is always an important role, an important and I think irremovable mediating role between something like cognitive science and your metaphysics via your philosophy of science. Because if the philosophy of science is exactly that place where you are trying to work out the ontology of all of the entities and the relationships between them that are presupposed in all of science, not just physics. And that is therefore the important mediator in any kind of physicalism in your metaphysics. So that's what I take metaphysics to be for many of the people, myself included, who consider themselves non-reductive physicalists, but nevertheless think that both the philosophy of science and then further the metaphysics that emerges in response to that philosophy of science and acts as, I think, an important constraint on it. That's how they do and see the metaphysics. So, I mean, the problem with the term, of course, and this is one of the issues I have about it, as I've mentioned, I think it, for historical reasons that are not ultimately philosophically justifiable, metaphysical, supernatural, and magical in the pejorative sense of magic have all been assimilated together in a way that's very dangerous. And I think when many people invoke the term, from a positive regard and from a negative regard in the current culture, they're using the term in that way that I reject. So that's kind of what I would say. At least, I don't think that's a complete answer because of the subtlety of your thinking. That's how I would start the conversation with you around that topic.
Yeah, well, I basically agree with everything that you said there, so, and I think that was an incredibly useful answer also, Dr. Rickmodder. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you, Strawn.
Right, and before our last question, J. David just wanted to make a clarification that he's not assuming sole credit authorship on Stereologia. Its inspiration and was arise from discussions that are documented in the server. So
I'll take that in hand, and I'll try to remember to give credit to the Discord server then.
Last question was David. You had one more question.
Yeah, John, I'm just curious about your own traditions you've studied with, the teachers and the lineage of all the, I guess, major practices that you do and teach. So meditation, qigong, etc.
So the meditation and the Tai Chi Chuan, Qigong, so the Vipassana, the Metta, the Tai Chi, and some of the Qigong, they were originally two individuals called Brock and June Brown, and then Robert Young, and they were both students of Andy James, and he was a student of Rose Lee. This is the Beijing tradition of Tai Chi Chuan. But Andy did a particular thing where he brought in Vipassana and Metta, and then June especially did this amazing thing where I found she really got them to flow together very well. And all the Neoplatonic stuff, that's I'm sorry, that's much more sort of reverse engineering and me trying to draw from various traditions. There isn't a proper community or lineage or heritage, which is part of the meaning crisis in the West, of course. So there I'm relying on a lot of people who are also similarly trying to engage in this reconstructive reinventio process. And then what I'm trying to do is my best philosophical historical understanding, use my experience with already established wisdom practices from Asiatic philosophies, and then use my cog sci to try and get the best possible rational reconstruction. This is exactly what I'm trying to do right now, and many of you get to see it happening in public, in concert with many people, right? I'm trying to reverse engineer a reinventio dialectic. So that's sort of how it all comes together for me.
Cool, thank you.
Well, that was great. Thank you so much, John, and thank you so much, everyone, for the great questions. I've posted a link to the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord YouTube channel in the event text, so please go to it, subscribe. This Q&A and all the other Q&As, although I'm a little bit behind, are uploaded there, so please listen and like. And I've also posted a link to the calendar, so please subscribe to our Google Calendar, and it will show up in your own time so you know when all our events are going on. This is a growing community. We're here for you guys, so if there are events that you want to see here, let us know, or if there are events you want to run, let us know. We want to make this, we want everyone taking part in this community. So thanks again, John. This was fantastic.
Thank you. I always enjoy coming here. I'm also very pleased that people like Kira and Mark are here. I as much as I possibly can, I want to encourage the integration between the Sangha and the Discord server. I think that's really wonderful and important for both communities. So thank you very much, Brett, for helping to facilitate that, encourage that, and being sort of a constant presence there, acting as a sort of living bridge. So thank you for that, Brett.
And thank you. So thanks everyone. That's it for tonight. We've got a lot of other events this week. So check the calendar, and we'll see you all next time. Have a great night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, John.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.